Hey friends, Rick Lee James here, inviting you to join me over at rickleejames.substack.com. Substack is a great new free platform that helps me connect directly with all of you who listen to my music and podcasts. All you have to do is subscribe with your email address, and that's it. It's easy to use, and we can interact right away. So go to rickleejames.substack.com for some inspiration in your inbox. Welcome to Voices in My Head, the official podcast of me, Rick Lee James. I'm a recording artist, a singer, a songwriter, an author, a worship leader, and an ordained minister in the Church of the Nazarene. The Voices in My Head podcast is where I discuss music, movies, books, pop culture, theology, and more with friends, colleagues, and sometimes just by myself. Now make sure to let me know what you think of today's episode by leaving me a review on iTunes or by tweeting at me at Rick Lee James on Twitter. And please join my mailing list at rickleejames.com where you can receive an email every time a new episode is released. And by the way, in case you're interested in a daily dose of kindness and encouragement beyond this podcast, I also run the Twitter account at Mr. Rogers Say, where I post daily quotes from Fred Rogers, one of the voices in my head. Well, I guess that's it for the intro, so sit back, relax, and listen to the latest episode of Voices in My Head. Welcome back to Voices in My Head. As always, I'm your host, Rick Lee James, and I'm so glad that you're here with me tonight for what I know is going to be another great conversation. On January 21st, 2020, Religion News Service posted an article written by Shane Claiborne that said, "A lot of contemporary worship music doesn't offer the best theology, but Hymn for the 81% by a South Bend, Indiana worship leader has gone viral with a cocktail of prophetic fire and Christ-like grace." Daniel Deitrich, who wrote and performed Hymn for the 81%, is a singer and songwriter based in South Bend, Indiana. His honest, heartbreaking, yet hopeful writing finds a home in massive Americana anthems, catchy indie rock hooks, as well as intimate acoustic confessionals. He stopped by for a podcast visit today, and I couldn't be happier about it. Daniel Deitrich, welcome to Voices in My Head.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, I am really glad to have a chance to finally get to talk to you. I've been a fan of yours for a while and have been following you, I guess since, maybe it was late last year, early this year, whenever Hymn for the 81% came out, but it began getting a lot of exposure, and I just had one friend after another that would send me links to it and say, "You've got to check out this song, you've got to check it out," and and it was just great. It was one of those things that was just organically happening, that people in the church who were not a part of that 81% were really needing kind of a voice, and I feel like in many ways God used that song. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about it, and at the end of our program tonight I'm going to play the song. But I'm really excited to just get to know you a little bit as a person too this evening. And I told you before we started recording, I found out that we have a mutual old friend in Cliff Ritchie, and so I thought, you know what, let's start right off talking about old Cliff and seeing our connection with him, because for those of you listening who don't know, and many of you probably don't, Cliff Ritchie is an amazing singer, songwriter, one of the best guitar players I've ever had the chance to play with, and I've known him for probably 25 years, all the way back when he had a band called Fisher's Net, and I played a few gigs with Fisher's Net back in the day. We did a youth pastor internship together in Middletown, Indiana one summer, and that's when I really got to know Cliff. And then his band turned into, I think it was, they went from Fisher's Net to become
AM Drive?
AM Drive, that's right. I couldn't remember if AM Drive came first or Peterson Fly came next. Or was Peterson Fly the second one, I think.
Peterson Fly for like a minute,
Yeah. And but anyway, and then he'd had a number of really great solo projects. But I just found out today from a podcast that you host that you were friends with Cliff as well. So what's your connection with him? I'd love to know a little bit more how you guys met up.
Yeah. We met. He was in Fisher's Net at the time, and we met at a camp and hit it off. And then my band would play with his band during the AM drive days. And Cliff has been like a mentor and a really good friend ever since. He engineered and recorded our first band record.
Oh, wow.
So we got in. We were in Gaither's studios. He was working there at the time.
Yeah, I
which is
remember
this,
that.
like $1 million room, and he got it like after hours to record our first record as a band. Took the photos for our album cover. Like he helped a step of the way, and so I've just been really grateful for him in the years since too. So.
You know, the irony about him is I always remember thinking while he was working in Gaither Studio, just how much he hated with the fires of 1,000 Suns, Southern gospel music. And I always thought how ironic it was that he was working in Gaither Studio and he would send out little messages from time to time. This music's driving me insane. But it was funny. It was neat to hear some of the work he got to do out of that studio too. And it was just always an interesting match. Incredibly talented guy. I could talk about him for a while, and I've always been jealous of his talent because man, he's got a lot of it for sure.
Oh yeah, he's just such a killer writer and guitarist, and just all around good person.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Now that we've met on that mutual ground of Cliff together, and I'd love to get to know you a little bit more and let my listeners know more about who you are. Many of them, I'm sure, have probably heard at least one of your songs by now, and if they're like me, they probably went to your catalog on Apple Music or Spotify and started listening through some of your other music as well. But it's not often that we get a chance just to sit down and get to know you a little bit. So I wonder if we could start tonight. Maybe you could share some of your background with us. And I'd love to especially kind of hear your faith background, because it's probably similar to what a lot of our listeners, grew up with. And you can hear it coming through in the song, like Hymn for the 81%. So just maybe tell us a bit of your background, kind of where you grew up and what kind of church you were a part of, and kind of bring us up to the present day.
Like a hint in the song, like I grew up in the church. It was a Church of God out of Anderson, Indiana, the denomination.
Okay.
The church itself, grew up in Southwest Michigan, and so from an early age, I remember junior high. I was a super shy kid, and my parents reached out to the youth pastor, and he showed me a few chords on guitar and got me in the youth band, kind of my in to music and church. And so I grew up playing in the church band in high school, and then went off to college at Anderson University in Anderson, Indiana. And it was there that I really started to make my faith my own. I started asking questions, and oftentimes met with unsatisfactory answers, as tends to happen. So I had big questions, and a real mile marker for me was a trip to Nepal through my college, and we got to work alongside Mother Teresa's missionaries for a little bit, and just witnessing their commitment to the way of Jesus, just this selfless giving their lives in service to the poorest of the poor, was just deeply inspiring. And then I came back to the U.S. and just had sort of this crisis of faith around, probably unfairly, looked around the college and my evangelical bubble, and not satisfied with how the American church was living out its faith. And so that started, what many refer to as a destruction. I started, the pieces of the house of cards, cards started to fall. And it was kind of a slow motion deconstruction. I had big questions and some voices along the way kind of inviting me deeper into those conversations. I feel like, Rob Bell was a big one for everybody that kind of encouraged questions. Like his books are just all a bunch of questions. Like what if this isn't what we think it is? And what if God really is as loving as as he is? And so I dropped out of college, or like I like to put it, I took a break from college and am still on break. Which is probably good for the student loan aspect of things. But so I toured with a band shortly after that. Band I started in high school, and then we continued through my 20s, basically toured around and got pretty close at a couple of points. Thought we had made it. We signed with a label in LA and recorded an album out there. And just every indie band's dream, like you sign on the dotted line, you think you've arrived. And then a few months after we had mixed the record, the whole label folded, just ceased to exist. The two partners couldn't agree on stuff, so they split up. And they sat on our masters, though. So we didn't own our masters. We learned like a lot of hard lessons from the music business.
Yeah.
And from that, we re-recorded the whole album ourselves and released it, and being kind of our last album as a band. And just real life caught up with us, jobs, and started having families, and tour wasn't cutting it for raising a family. And,
I understand.
And that sort of thing. Yeah, you get it.
Hey,
from there I went to
Do you mind if I cut in just a second to ask what the name of your band was?
Yeah, the name of the band is Rocket Ship.
Well, and, say it one more time.
It's still living out.
You cut out for just a second. Johnny's Rocket Ship.
Johnny's Little Rock.
Oh,
yeah, terrible name, but really great band.
I don't think it's a bad name at all. I think it's nice. That's good.
Compared to other band names, it's equally weird, and yeah.
That's great. Now, please continue. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just was curious.
Oh, that's
about
great.
That.
Yeah, from there, I started, coming back to the church and became a worship leader in the church I grew up in, kind of part-time, and then that's slowly turned into full-time, which turned into me becoming like the pastor of young adults and worship. And through that whole experience, I was still asking questions, pushing the envelope, and really went through a season sort of giving up on church and especially on worship music. I was just so burned out on, you get up there, play your 3 songs that are just the same, a couple of phrases over and over. The goal is to elicit sort of emotional response to prepare people for the sermon, which is the main event. And I was just really burned out on that thing. I was like, is this really like what church is about? Is this what worship is about? And a few voices, Aaron Nyquist is one, and his work with A New Liturgy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's these 25-minute audio, kind of reflective. There's a couple songs, some meditations, some prayers and scriptures.
Yeah.
And then bands like The Brilliance and Gungor really sort of cracked open, like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way forever. Like, you can incorporate different elements and worship actually be spiritual formation. It doesn't have to be just like emotional manipulation for the main event.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So that brings us a little closer to the present. 4 years ago, I started a church in South Bend, where we live now, And
Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's the home of Mayor Pete, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah, I thought South Bend sounded familiar. Are you fairly close to Elkhart, that area?
yeah,
Okay,
yep,
yeah.
right next door to
All
Elkhart.
right, yeah. My sister lives not far from there, so yeah, I was
Oh,
thinking
nice.
that was right, and I've played one or two concerts in that area over the last few years. So I was trying to get my bearings. It's been, uh, 2020 has been a long decade, and so
Right.
it's been so long since I've traveled anywhere to play this year. So anyway, I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get the geography of it. So you're very close to Michigan,
Sure,
where
yeah.
you are then, in South Bend,
Yep.
and you're at a church that you started. And please continue from there. I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear what kind of church it is and the kind of people that you worship with.
Yeah, so it was a beautiful church. We started it from the ground up. I moved down here to help start it. I was, the pastor of worship and arts, and we really wanted to be a church for those who didn't fit or weren't welcome in a lot of the churches I'd been a part of until then. And so we were in church. We cared about justice and reconciliation and some of the big questions about scripture and inerrancy and what do we do with the Bible and how do we live it out. Just tackled those head on, and it was really great. And then released Hymn 1% in January, late January.
Okay.
And I was actually let go from the church shortly after that. So
Oh wow.
no longer with that church.
Was that because of the song, or was there, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to talk about it, but
Okay.
the statement is the public statement is there was no hint of immorality or moral failings, but we reached an impasse.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
you can, yeah.
Well, excuse me for prying. I wasn't trying to. I just was
No,
curious
no,
about that.
it was it's been a difficult season even since then. It was kind of my last hurrah, my last try at church.
Sure.
And to have it end like it did was just a real blow.
Yeah.
When you get let go from a church, you lose community as well as income overnight, and so it's just tough spot. But we've been doing all right, and around us that have helped us. And
well, let me say I'm sorry, and I've known several people in that place, and that is a very hard place, and it's hard to know what to say in those moments other than other than my heart hurts with you, and I'm sorry, because that really is a family situation when you're in a community like that, for sure. So yeah. Well, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were still going, but it sounds like you've had some ups and some downs, as many of us do. But I want to, if you don't mind, unless you wanted to share any more of your story, I'd love to maybe dive in just a little bit about kind of where Hymn for the 81% came about, and probably sort of the roller coaster ride that has followed as a result of its release. I wonder if this would be a good time to kind of dive into that just a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think the seeds of that song started, for the 2016 election. Our church at the time was just starting out. We were meeting on Wednesday nights, actually, while we were looking for a more permanent. And so we gathered the night after the election. I just remember so many of my friends were just really upset and not just like, oh, my team lost, that's a
Yeah.
bummer.
Yeah.
I had friends that felt less safe
Yeah.
because of their identity, their skin color, their immigration status, a number of things. And through the years since, I just watched the larger-than-life voices that my faith, the Dr. James Dobsons and the Franklin Grahams and all those evangelical rock stars,
Yeah.
either be completely silent in the face of like mounting evil, or they were like defending it. That was the hardest part for me. I could not fathom how the people that told me character matters and that no matter what, you follow the way of Jesus, even if it means giving up or prestige or money or whatever, just like fall in line.
Yeah.
And so,
It's baffling.
it was just baffling. And I was just a small town worship leader. I didn't have a platform or anything like that, but I felt like I had to say something. And so, I wrote Hymn for the 81% and put it out there into the world. And I thought like most of my songs, a few hundred people might listen to it and enjoy it. And we our day. But it really seemed to strike a chord and kind of took on a life of its own, which has been both amazing and from this is how things like that happen perspective.
Yeah. Well, and as I said before, I think it enabled a lot of us to kind of articulate things that we had been feeling and probably things that we had been saying for a while. And yet you said it in a way that, Shane probably said it best, Claiborne, when he was talking about the, how did he phrase it? He said, and I read it earlier, it was something about the prophetic fire and Christ-like grace. There's a sense in which there's this grace that you were able to write about in the song that is not it's not a hateful tirade or anything. Like so often I feel like we get caught up in these culture wars, and right now politics has become religion and sports, to so many people, and so it's turned into this routine of my side is good, your side is evil, and no matter what my side or your side does, nothing will ever change that. And so we talk to each other in dehumanizing ways, and people kind of scream across the aisle, and just because you're not on my team, you're no longer even worthy of compassion or grace or anything. And there's a sense in which the way that you have laid it out so poetically in your lyrics, that you're actually talking like you're talking to someone you love dearly, and you're saying, I can't believe I have a holy disappointment in what I'm seeing right now, and I don't know what else to do. And I think the shock that you express and that God has helped you articulate through this song is the same shock that so many of us were feeling. I mean, what do you do when the people that are your heroes of the faith and have taught you everything you know about Jesus, brought you to Jesus, endorse the most unchristlike and ungodly person that we can almost imagine, and not just like
it's almost comical.
Yeah. It's not just like, well, I held my nose and voted because I felt like it was the lesser of two evils. I totally get that. Like I have a fair amount of compassion for that, but it turned into not that. It was like just full-throated support. Jesus wants this, and if you want to follow Jesus and be faithful to God, then you have to support every immorality you're seeing right now. And so I guess all that to say is, I'm with you. I hear these words, and it's something I've said and prayed time and time again. Like, Lord, I'm so shocked. For me, and maybe you can attest to this as well, because you had discussed about your friends and people that felt unsafe after 2016. I can only liken it to the way I felt when 9/11 happened in 2001, and there was this sick feeling the morning after of like, what just happened here? Like, I can't quite believe what's going on. Like, I was not thrilled about Hillary, but I was resigned to her. I had I couldn't believe it when, like the following morning I was like, well, great, now what's going to happen? How do I talk to my wife this morning? But did you kind of get that kind of feeling too? And not like, and the only way I can describe it, like, there was a time after 9/11 where, like, comedians talk about going into comedy clubs, and they said the laughter was strange, like for months after, because they couldn't quite, like, people didn't know quite how to laugh yet, it was strange. So I guess all of my talking is leading into that. Did you kind of feel like you were having a similar experience to that, and the people around you were?
Yeah, and at first it was almost like, is this a bad dream? This can't have really happened. And then when the numbers came out that 81% of white evangelicals just voted in masse for this guy, it was
us.
Yeah, it was like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what I felt. I was like, we did this?
Yeah.
Like, this
for me, it really caused an examination of, like, what, I don't think this is a bug, it's a feature, of evangelical culture. Like, the evangelical church paved the way, and it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't hold your nose and vote for this guy. There was a celebration of his brashness, his off-color, like, tough guy, whatever. There's a great book out right now called Jesus and John Wayne.
Yeah, I've read it. Great
gets
book.
into this. Oh, yeah. And just how, like, this is the culmination of, like, the scriptural Jesus behind, and instead following some sort of, like, John Wayne MMA fighter Jesus that really doesn't match up with the scriptures. And yeah, I think the hardest part has been, like, realizing my own complicity in that ecosystem, in that world, and trying to come to grips with, like, how do we fix such a huge problem?
Yeah.
I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Well, and when you,
because it's not going to change with the election overnight, this issue is still going to remain. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that book, Jesus and John Wayne, because there is a very similar flow, and I've kind of asked that question as well. Like you just said, I wonder if it's not a bug. I think it's a feature, And that book was very insightful in many ways. And one thing that I had, the John Wayne thing, even more than she goes into in that amazing book, I had done some study about John Wayne a few years ago, because when I was a kid growing up, for whatever reason, the Saturday afternoon westerns were on TV, and I somewhere in my elementary school years, I just idolized John Wayne. I just thought he was like, that's it. That's what a man is, It's an American. Well then when I started researching the real man, I found out like what a role he played in McCarthyism. I found out that he dodged the draft by using his family as an excuse. Like whenever it was time for him to be called to the war, and he said, he basically used, I can't, I've got to support my family, which you would think would be a noble thing, or even if he had sort of a, I'm a pacifist or whatever. But the reality was, he used his family as the excuse while he was living at a hotel with his girlfriend, and basically ignored his family, let them, like, didn't provide for them in that time that he said he was, so there was all these contradictions. Like when I learned about like the real John Wayne, not just the one on the screen. And I just found it like it was almost that same kind of bubble burst, like like really this was the guy that I thought was, what it meant to be a man, or an American or whatever. And so it's interesting that you brought that up, because that book does a great job of exploring ways that pop Christianity, we can call it white evangelicalism or whatever, but I think it really in many ways is sort of this poppy, watered down, kind of, I guess we'll call it happy clappy evangelical Christianity, like where it's taken us to in many ways, and it's been so obsessed with like toxic masculinity. They call it biblical manhood, but it's really toxic in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we find that like this person that was put in the White House, which is an embodiment of so many of those things, and so you have, instead of calling it what it is, a person joking about sexual assault. Back, when the Access Hollywood tapes came out, we suddenly justified it with, it's locker room talk. And I thought, which locker room are you guys going to? Because that's
exactly.
not like I go to the gym all the time. I never hear people talk like that. Like
never been in that locker room.
Never in my. And I went to a pretty rough, school at one point. I felt like. So anyway, so in a sense we're. I want to get back to you and let you talk. It's good to have this conversation for me. I rarely get to have it, but there's a great line in your song that you talk about. It says, "You weaponize religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls." And I have to wonder, and this may, I'm sorry if it does. This may bring some more painful realities to you that I'm sure you've probably experienced since releasing the song. But what kind of pushback, I'm wondering, have you personally experienced from articulating things that way? Because I know on my end, I've had friends who were desperate for someone in the community that actually had a voice that could say something like this, and that's why I kept getting all these emails and tweets and Facebook messages like, "You got to hear this. He says it just like it. This is what my heart is saying." But on the other hand, I'm sure, I'm only guessing, but I'm sure you must have almost gotten like a Dixie Chicks like pushback, like shut up and sing, like we don't want you to get political, or and right. So I'm just curious, what kind of that have you encountered? I mean, has there been a lot of that?
Yeah, definitely. I'll preface it all by saying like the good has definitely outweighed the bad. Like you said, those messages. I got just a ton of positive messages like, "Thank you for articulating how I felt," and I left church 20 years ago, and this is why, but now I don't feel so alone, kind of stuff. Just really inspiring and messages I was really grateful for.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was definitely some backlash. After Shane posted that article, it got picked up by a few other news outlets, and it eventually hit Fox News' homepage. And as soon as it Fox News, it was just like this deluge of hate mail and just horrible, like, death threats, arson threats, all, quote, good Christian people. How dare you speak about, God this way? This isn't a worship song. Put you in a cage and blow your head off, like crazy, horrible stuff. But that's just sort of the nature of the internet now too. You say anything, post anything, and there's going to be people from the safety and anonymity of their key that will just say anything. So that just sort of rolled off my back. The internet troll kind of thing. But definitely it caused hard conversations, with people I love, and in my own community, and so it's definitely made for some tumultuous times as well. But in the grand scheme of things, like, so many people have risked and paid way more for speaking up than I have, and so, like, I would never consider myself feel sorry for me, I'm a martyr kind of thing. Like, I knew what I was getting into, and said what I said because I felt like I needed to, and
Well, it's a tough burden to carry your cross, and in some ways I feel like what you were doing was doing your best to be faithful to the gospel as you're hearing it, and you don't intend to, like, invite the scorn of the world or even the praise of the world. You're just trying to be faithful, and especially as songwriters, we're always kind of working out our emotions, I think, in the things that we're writing, and sometimes it's the best way to put things out there. And I just think it's a powerful thing when music can, bring about, like, such deep emotion in that way. And if memory serves, looking at the picture that was connected to that article that Shane Claiborne put out, I believe it was the picture of all those very prominent worship leaders like Kerry Jobe and different ones who were in the White House, surrounding the president, which was another time was, I always wonder, like, I know some of these people, and they're good people, like, they're loving people, and I've had the chance to have interactions with many of them over the years, and I've thought, was there a moment where, like, you actually got to speak some truth into the situation? My fear of the whole situation of, like, chasing after power like this is all the people who say they care about the president. In reality, I wonder if they really do. You know what I mean? Because the reality is, if he wasn't president, because I don't want to pick on him too much, because to me he's a symptom of a much greater problem. He's been enabled to be the person he is by the circles he's traveled in and things like that. So to me, like, a Christian, if he wasn't president, if he was just some guy that we know that is connected to our congregation or something, like, wouldn't our responsibility be to him, like, look, you're getting up in years, and I'm not trying to judge you, but you've got a lot to be accountable for, and it doesn't look like you are professing any sort of faith at all. Like, right. like in fact, it seems the opposite. Like, I'm wondering if, I don't even think I should let my kids around you, to be honest, type guy. Like, don't you think it's time to, approach the Lord about these things? Like, shouldn't we be calling to repentance, And that's the saddest thing about all this to me, that for something like politics, partisan politics anyway, not kingdom politics, so many have decided, I don't really care where Donald Trump spends eternity, because I'm going to get what I want out of this office,
Mm-hmm.
And I've often wondered, like, we're heading to the end of his presidency. Well, these people who have been so enabling of him, like, okay, so is there going to ever be an attempt to disciple this guy? Like, is he going to be what you call a baby Christian forever? Which I don't even think he's even begun that walk. I don't think there's any indication of that. But it's been staggering to think, and then to hear you tell that story about, Christian people calling to tell you they're going to put you in a cage and blow your head off and all those kind of things. It's amazing to me where we've come, and it reminds me, like, we need something akin to, I guess, what I would call revival, but not in the sense of a revival as I've always thought of it. Like an actual real coming of faith, like something that says, I follow Jesus, and as Jesus reminds us in Scripture, the kingdom of God is among us right now. Like, we live in a different politic already, and these things that everybody's running after, that's not where I live. Jesus is Lord and no one else, so I don't bow to Caesar. I say to Caesar, thus says the Lord. And I think that's what we've lost in if we ever had it. But anyway, well, I wanted to ask you too, while I have you here. I'm sorry, I'm talking way more than I usually talk with my guests, but there's just so much to say. I feel like in some ways the spigot is open and it's coming out. But
right, no, it's great.
I'd love to ask you too. I know that you've been doing some work with Vote Common Good, and and I don't know a lot about Vote Common Good. I've been running into some faith-based organizations that deal with politics, but not in a way that says, like, in order to follow Jesus, you have to vote this way. It's more this idea of, and you can tell me if I'm wrong and inform me a little bit more, but Vote Common Good seems to me more like a group of people that say, yes, we follow Jesus, and our allegiance is completely to Him, and so the thing that we're doing is asking, how can I best love my neighbor, and simply use politics as a tool, So I don't know if I'm hitting it on the head, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about sort of Vote Common Good and your work with them.
Yeah, Vote Common Good, I got to know through releasing the song. They reached out. Doug Padgett is the executive director there, and he reached out and was like, hey, we're doing this cross-country bus tour, and we think your song would really fit well with what we're doing. You want to do some dates with us? And so I jumped on the bus with them for a few dates, and that turned into more dates. And then the shutdown happened. We went digital for a while, and then from August until election night, we were on the road in swing states and doing a rally just a night. And so Vote Common Good is it's more about the voters than the politicians. Okay. And so we, at one part of our rallies, which are kind of like, there's music, there's speaking, pretty high energy, a lot of fun, so pretty hard hitting, truth telling. Mm-hmm. There's a part where we would read, love is patient, love is kind, and read through that passage and say, can you replace love with the name of a politician you're thinking about voting for?
Yeah.
Can you put Trump's name in there? Trump is patient, Trump is kind, mm-hmm. Trump, and if you feel good
keeps
about...
no record of wrong. Right.
Right. So... is not boastful.
Right.
If you feel comfortable pulling the lever for him after reading that and comparing, this candidate to these values that we say we hold dear, then good on you. But if you feel like that doesn't sit well with your soul, what this candidate says and represents, then maybe we have to go in a different direction. And so Vote Common Good is bipartisan. There's Republicans and independents and Democrats. And it's also not just a Christian thing, faith-based. And so one of my friends on the tour is a Sufi Muslim. Mm-hmm. And we had, partnerships with rabbis and universalists and,
wow.
So kind of a broad, like, people of faith that want to see a change on election, and really focusing not on the negatives, but calling us all to a higher calling.
Yeah.
Like to say in the rallies, like, we're not here to remind you how bad Trump is. We're here to remind you how good you are. and call ourselves to those standards. So,
Wow.
and it was a really great run. It was life-giving to me to feel useful and feel like I was a part of something, and it was geared toward, like, we knew 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump, and we also knew that if we could sway, or broadly, if America could sway just 5% those voters away from Trump, that would determine the election. And it's still pretty early, but preliminary numbers say that that's about what happened, that about 76% of white evangelicals voted for Trump, and there was not a huge, not enough to feel good about sway away from Trump, but a significant number of people, probably close to 3 million people, changed their minds and didn't vote for Trump a second time.
Yeah.
Pretty encouraging that way.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I mean, there's a lot to be encouraged about and a lot to be discouraged about, I guess, all at the same time. And
Yeah.
as we're sitting here in the midst of, it just still seems like chaos and craziness in so many ways. But thank you for sharing about Vote Common Good, because it really sounds like a neat group of people. Sadly, I didn't really find out about them until just weeks ago, because it sounds like such a worthwhile thing to be a part of. I don't know if it's just because I've been pretty much I haven't left my town really for since, I guess, probably February, just because we're home and online school and everything else, learning everything. It seems
totally.
like every church service I do is 3 times harder now because there's extra, and I just feel like I've lost track of so many things. But I'm glad to know about that, and I'm gonna look to them more in the future. I hope you guys will do things together more, maybe as we head into other elections and things. But let me ask you this too before we end our conversation tonight, and I don't want to keep you for hours on end, but I'm enjoying talking with you, and I wonder, with all that you've been through, I know it sounds like there's been a lot of downs and a lot of ups and places in between, and then it's good to hear that you found a place where you did feel used for good, like with Vote Common Good, after the disappointment of a church letting you go that you loved a lot. And I just wonder, how are you doing? Are you feeling like you're at a place where you're personally being nourished? Like you're feeling like I guess I'm asking, how can we pray for you? Might be the best thing I could ask at this point, because I always want to try to be an encouragement and have our listeners, who I know many of them, if you say I'm going to pray for you on this, they're going to do it. So I really I just kind of want to find out how are you? You and your family, and
Yeah, thanks for asking. I really appreciate that. We're doing okay. It's really been a hard season. But we, through the tour, to meet so many good people that have really restored my faith in the Jesus movement. Met so many people doing good work in their towns and in their cities that, for the most part, goes underappreciated and overlooked. So it's just really inspiring to meet so many great people following the way of Jesus and really loving their neighbors well. But yeah, we're at a point where we're trying to figure out for our family, and so honestly, prayers for wisdom and guidance and opportunities. All appreciated.
Yeah.
So.
Well, good. Well, listeners, I'm counting on you to add Daniel and his family to your prayer list, because we've all been there at some point where we're kind of facing the future and wondering what God has next for us. And I wish sometimes God would just be clear and unambiguous about things like that, and yet doesn't always seem to be the way that God chooses. I always think of one of my favorite lyrics by Rich Mullins in his song "Hard to Get," where he says, "I can't see where you're leading me unless you've led me here where I'm lost enough to let myself be led." And I always think, man,
Yeah.
that just says it all. I'm here where I'm lost enough to let myself be led.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, I'm guessing you probably have a bit of fandom for Rich Mullins, some there in your musical background. And I was recalling when I had Shane Claiborne on my podcast a little over, maybe it's 2 years ago now. We were talking about Rich Mullins because he was friends with Rich, and so it's pretty cool to see you and Shane kind of getting together for that article and all. But are you a Rich Mullins guy?
I love Rich Mullins.
Yeah.
I remember actually a big moment for my faith. I was just it was probably early college and stressing over this idea of God's will for my life. Like, what is God's will? Where does God want me to go to college? What does God want me to do? You can get real granular with that, right? Like, what does God want me to do for fun on the weekend? Should I be serving at the soup kitchen, or is it okay, just hang out with friends? You can make yourself crazy thinking about it. And I saw this interview with Rich, and asked him that question, like, how do you know God's will for your life? And Rich was like, I don't think God cares what college you go to, what job you get. I think God cares if you love your neighbor. And it was just like a weight off my shoulders, like, oh gosh, maybe I'm way overthinking this. Like, maybe there isn't a set out step-by-step plan that I'm constantly failing. But maybe it's just this broad, do you love your neighbor? Are you loving God and loving others? And so, Rich really helped me with that.
I'm glad to hear that. I could only assume, because so many of us are shaped by the music Rich brought in his life. But that's good. I think you're a writer that's in the vein of Rich Mullins, and I hope you take that as the compliment that it is, because I really got, for whatever reason, there are some writers and some songs that I think for whatever moment God just uses them, and there's something that becomes greater than the song itself, and it's something that becomes greater than the writer. And I think Rich was like that, and what he brought, and honestly, I think him for the 81% is something that for whatever reason God, I feel like, just has his hand on, and it's something that again, it transcends the songs, it transcends the writing, but for some reason God is using the good work that you have done to be used on a huge scale. And so I'm very, maybe the best thing I could say is I'm proud of you for offering your gift in such a way that would allow God to use it, and in such a way that can be scary, because if there's anything that when you release a song like that, especially in the time that we're in, it's one thing to write it, it's another thing to kind of put it out there in the world and see what happens with it. And so I think there's some courage in that as well. So I'm very proud of you and the work that you've done, and I know God is definitely not finished with you, and I think there's going to be some amazing things in the future. And you know this too. I don't know what to do. I just want to offer you encouragement in any way that I can, because
no, I really appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I hope you'll come back sometime and we can talk a little bit more. But I think we're going to close the show tonight in just a minute by actually playing Hymn for the 81%. 81%, your song. And if people haven't had a chance to hear it, they'll get to hear it there. And I want to let our listeners know that if they go to our website at voicesinmyheadpodcast.com and to this episode, I'm going to have as many links as I have available for Daniel and his music and ways that you can kind of help support him. He has a Patreon page where you can go to and offer him support, which I know helps him and his family. So we're going to make sure and put links to all those things on voicesinmyheadpodcast.com. So is there anything else that you wanted to share with the people who may be listening right now? Anything else on your heart before we close up and listen to your song?
No, just appreciate you having me on and appreciate the conversation and, of course, appreciate the prayers as well.
Well, you definitely have that, friend. So we're going to close out our time together with him for the 81%. Daniel Deitrich, thank you for being one of the voices in my head this week.
I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning evening service, knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. Learn from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep to the wolves. You said to love the lost, so I'm loving you now. You said speak the truth, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice rolls out. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from the babies. I look to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. Oh, your fear turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language, torn from the pages of the good book. You weaponize religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. You said to love the lost, so I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, so I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice rolls out. You taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. You taught me better than this. Come home, come home. Oh, taught me better than this. Come home, come home. Oh, you said to love the lost. I'm trying to love you now. You said speak the truth, so I'm calling you out. I wish you'd live the words that you put in my mouth. May love overcome and justice roll out. May love overcome and justice roll out. May love overcome and justice roll out. May love overcome and justice roll out.
Thank you for joining me here this week on Voices in My Head. I hope you'll visit me on my website at rickleejames.com, where you can find out more about me, get my music on vinyl and CD, follow my blog, and even schedule me for a concert or a speaking engagement. Better yet, even a book signing in your neighborhood. You can find all that and more at rickleejames.com. Also, it would mean a great deal to me if you could write a review of this podcast on iTunes. The more positive reviews that we receive, the more visible this podcast will be online. And now for the benediction. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. God bless you, and thank you for listening to Voices in My Head.